My brother told the Houston Meridian Medical Center's credentialing board that I had fabricated my fellowship references. He said it with the measured, grieving tone of a man doing something painful out of moral obligation. He adjusted the notes in front of him. He wore his white coat over a pressed Oxford shirt, and it occurred to me, watching him from the respondent's table, that he had dressed deliberately for this. That somewhere between waking up that morning and walking into this room, he had decided that the coat would make him look credible. It worked. My parents sat in the gallery behind him. My mother in a silk blouse the color of good china. My father with his hands folded in the posture of a man, accustomed to being the most authoritative person in any given room. I sat at the respondent's table with my hands flat on the surface. I did not look at them. I looked at the panel. Dr. Kimura, the board chair, lifted the reference letter my brother had flagged as fraudulent. She read it once through. Then she set it down with the slow, deliberate care of someone handling something she did not expect to find. She pushed back her chair. She gathered the file to her chest. She walked out of the room, without speaking to anyone. The door closed behind her with a soft, decisive click. My brother allowed himself a small adjustment of posture. Not quite a smile, but the physical equivalent of one. He thought she had stepped out to call hospital legal. He thought she was preparing to suspend my credentials on the spot, and was being discreet about the process. He was wrong about everything. The certified envelope had arrived 11 days before, delivered before 6 in the morning on a Wednesday. I was still in scrubs from a 36-hour trauma shift. I had cold coffee, an open surgical case file on my kitchen counter, and the specific kind of fatigue that sits behind the eyes like pressure. I sliced the envelope open with my car key. Inside was a formal complaint, requesting emergency review of my fellowship credentials, and immediate suspension of my surgical privileges pending investigation. My brother was listed as primary complainant. Attached were 2 supporting declarations signed under penalty of perjury. One from my mother, one from my father. The allegation that the letter of recommendation from Dr. Alton Prescott, the mentor who had shaped the first 6 years of my surgical career, who had sat across a conference table from me when I was a second-year resident and told me I had unusually good hands and an unusually clear head, was a forgery. My brother's declaration stated that Dr. Prescott had told him personally, at a medical conference 4 months prior, that he had never written such a letter, that he barely recognized my name. My mother's declaration said, I had always struggled with honesty under pressure. My father said he had long harbored professional concerns about my suitability for surgical practice, and had hoped the matter would resolve without formal intervention. I read the whole thing standing at the counter. Then I set it down and finished the coffee. I drove to River Oaks that afternoon. The neighborhood where I grew up was the same as it always was. Wide streets, old magnolias, the particular silence of money that doesn't need to announce itself. The house sat at the end of a circular drive. I'd spent the first 18 years of my life learning to move quietly through it. My mother was in the sitting room with a colleague from the hospital foundation board. They were reviewing auction catalog proofs, spread across the coffee table, the kind of charitable work that photographs beautifully, and asks nothing uncomfortable of the person doing it. She looked up when I walked in. She did not ask her colleague to excuse them. You signed a legal declaration stating I fabricated my credentials, I said. She touched the collar of her blouse. We signed it because we care about you. The hours you're keeping, the stress of the fellowship. We're genuinely worried about your state of mind. Where is he? She gestured toward the study. Her colleague examined a catalog page with sudden intense interest. My father was at his desk, reviewing what appeared to be retirement account statements. He did not look up when I entered. Your brother came to us with his concerns, he said. We felt it was our responsibility to support him. That's what families do. Dr. Prescott wrote that letter, I said. I watched him write it. We were in his office at Baylor St. Luke's. He had a styrofoam cup of soup that he kept saying he was going to let cool down and then kept drinking anyway. My father turned a page. Alton is in his mid-70s. He has some cognitive variability these days. It happens. I looked at him. The man who had stood at the head of every holiday table my entire life, who kept his department chief plaque in the entry hall, where guests couldn't miss it, who had told me on the day I matched into general surgery that it was a solid result, but that the top-tier trainees matched at Johns Hopkins, or UCSF, and that I should understand where that placed me. I looked at him for a moment that went longer than either of us acknowledged. Then I left without saying goodbye. I sat in the car in the driveway and called Vance. We had been friends since undergrad. He ran a small investigative firm now, built from a decade in the FBI's healthcare fraud division. He was methodical, private, and he owed me nothing, which was exactly why I trusted him with this. We met the following evening at a breakfast diner near the medical center. The kind of place with high-backed vinyl booths and overhead lights that buzz just enough to be noticeable. Vance ordered pie he didn't touch and laid out what he'd found. My brother served on the hospital's research endowment committee. He had held the position for 3 years. An external audit of the endowment fund was scheduled to begin the following Monday. 6 days from our meeting. Internal compliance reviews had already flagged approximately $380,000 in irregular transfers between the endowment's operating subaccounts. The transfers were incremental, spaced over 18 months, routed through a vendor entity that had been registered quietly and never produced any documented services. The registered address of the vendor corresponded to a rental property my brother owned in Galveston. Vance explained the motive structure the way he would explain a medical procedure, with the flat precision of someone who has seen this particular anatomy before. If my fellowship were revoked and my surgical privileges suspended, I would become the natural focus of any administrator looking for someone with system access, who might have financial motive for misconduct. A disgraced fellow with a questioned ethics record was a far more useful explanation than a tenured attending from a family with 2 generations of hospital ties. My brother needed me professionally destroyed before the auditors arrived Monday. He had 6 days, and he had used them. Vance slid over the final document, a security badge access log, obtained through a contact in hospital facilities management. My brother's badge had been used to enter the endowment financial suite at 11:52 p.m., on the same night as the most recent irregular transfer. Entry logged. Exit logged 23 minutes later. The system also recorded biometric confirmation at entry, fingerprint, not just badge. He had been in that room. There was no ambiguity in the record. I pushed the envelope across the table. Vance pocketed it, said he'd be in San Antonio for a few days, and told me not to contact him unless something went sideways. He said to let the hearing run its course and to trust my attorney. Then he walked out, and I sat alone in the diner, with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me. A memory arrived the way they do, without warning, taking up all available space. I was 16. I had spent 3 months working on a biomedical research project for a state science competition, studying wound healing patterns under different nutritional conditions. My biology teacher had submitted it to the program without telling me. And when the nomination came in, she called my parents first, because she wanted them to know what I'd done. I came home from school on a Thursday to find my parents and my brother, home for winter break from his first year of medical school, sitting in the kitchen. My father had the program letter on the table. He told me it was a good exercise. He said that junior programs and professional credentialing were distinct categories, and that I should be careful not to confuse recognition at a preliminary level with actual competence. He said that the medical field was saturated, and that the students who went on to meaningful careers were the ones who understood early that potential required sustained discipline, not a ceremony. My brother said, "Congratulations. The way you say it when you're not paying attention." My mother refilled my brother's coffee and asked about his gross anatomy practical. I stood in the kitchen for what felt like a long time. Nobody looked at me again. I went upstairs. I did not come down for dinner, and nobody came to ask why. What I've thought about since is not the words. I've tried to stay clinical about the words, the kind of analysis I was trained to do in surgery, identifying what's wrong and working backward to cause. What stays with me is the kitchen going on without me in it, the specific quality of being invisible in the room where you grew up, that particular silence. Sitting in the diner, I understood something I had been approaching for years, without letting myself arrive at it. Every credential I had earned, every case I had closed, every faculty recommendation I had collected, none of it had ever landed in that house as proof of anything they didn't already believe. And it never would, because the belief was not about me. It was about a story they needed to be true in order for everything else in their world to make sense. I was the part of the story that complicated the narrative. And complicated narratives don't get revised, they get simplified. I paid the check and drove home. At the hearing, my brother performed exactly as I expected him to. His attorney introduced the complaint with what appeared to be reluctant thoroughness. My parents testified under oath. My father spoke, with the unhurried authority of a man who has chaired departments and sat on committees for 40 years. He said he had always had professional reservations about my judgment. He said Dr. Prescott had not, to his recollection, maintained any substantive mentorship relationship with me. He said he was testifying out of obligation to the institution. My mother followed. She wore the expression she deployed at benefit dinners when someone said something moving. She told the board she was devastated by the situation and hoped I would access whatever support I needed going forward. She produced no tears, but the architecture of grief was convincing. She had practiced it for decades. I sat at the respondents' table and did not react. I let them testify. I let every word go into the official record. I let them finish. Dr. Kimura had been gone for 22 minutes by the time the door opened again. She set the file on the table in front of her. She addressed the room. She said that she had spoken by telephone directly with Dr. Alton Prescott. Dr. Prescott was, she confirmed, dealing with some health challenges. He was also perfectly capable of identifying his own handwriting and his own signature. And he was entirely clear, she used the word entirely, and she said it carefully, that he had written and submitted that reference letter. He remembered the specific surgical cases he had referenced. He remembered our working relationship and its duration. He was prepared, if necessary, to submit a new sworn declaration to that effect. She then addressed the document my brother had submitted, as the supposedly authentic letter, the one he claimed I had forged. She said that it contained an institutional credential code embedded in the formatting that had not been in active use since a system migration 4 years ago. Whoever had generated that document had used an outdated template that still carried obsolete metadata. The implication was left in the room without elaboration. My attorney stood. She placed Vance's access log on the table. She placed the vendor registration documents on the table. She placed the transfer records on the table, dates and amounts visible and indexed. She addressed my brother directly. She said she wished to give him the opportunity to explain, on the record, why his access badge and biometric confirmation had been logged at the Endowment Financial Suite at 11:52 p.m. on the night of the most recent transfer. She said she was prepared to request a full subpoena of the hospital's independent biometric archive, if he would prefer the verification occur through that channel. My brother's attorney leaned toward him. My brother did not look at the attorney. He looked at my father. My father looked away, not dramatically, just a small definitive redirection of gaze toward the middle distance, the way you look when you have decided that something is no longer your concern. My brother said, in a voice that had lost its entire calibration, that he had made financial decisions under significant external pressure, that the situation was more complicated than it appeared, that there had been family discussions, he used that phrase twice, about managing the audit outcome before it escalated. He said he had believed incorrectly, that the approach was sustainable. He had just put my father in the record by name. My father stood up so quickly, his chair dragged back across the floor. His voice filled the room the way it always did. The baritone fan developed over 40 years of running a cardiology department, and Dr. Kimura brought her hand down flat on the table and told him to sit down. She ordered the session closed pending emergency referral to hospital legal and the Harris County District Attorney's Office. She directed the building security officer to ensure that my brother and my parents remained in the building until investigators arrived. I stood. I placed the no-contact notifications my attorney had prepared, one addressed to each of them, on the gallery table without looking at any of the faces above it. I picked up my bag. I walked out of the conference room and into the hallway, which was white and clean and smelled the way hospitals always smell, like antiseptic and recycled air, and something beneath that which doesn't have a name, but means that life is serious and time is limited. I took the elevator to the ground floor and walked out into the Houston afternoon, which was bright and hot, and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. My brother made his second mistake 4 days later. His personal recognizance release included a specific prohibition against accessing any hospital systems, any endowment records, or the professional files of any current Meridian staff member. His attorney had reviewed those terms with him. He had signed the acknowledgement. I prepared an email from a secondary address and sent it to my mother's personal account. The email appeared to be a draft administrative communication regarding outstanding documentation questions related to the endowment review. Exactly the kind of message my brother, from a different device and a different address, would be desperate to open. The attachment link was not a document. It was a monitoring file that logged device hardware, network location, and physical geolocation on access. My brother opened the link from my mother's personal laptop within 3 hours of delivery. The log recorded the device ID, the IP address, and the geolocation, which placed the access at the River Oaks property. My attorney forwarded the full log to the DA's office the following morning. By mid-afternoon, my brother's release had been revoked. The DA's investigator notified my father that because the access had occurred on my mother's device at their shared residence, both of my parents had become subjects in an expanded criminal conspiracy review. More immediately, the bond my father had secured using the River Oaks property as collateral was void. The property was placed under civil hold pending the investigation's outcome. My father had maintained a certain composure throughout the entire preceding 2 weeks. It was the composure I had observed my whole life. The steadiness of a man who weathers difficult things by assuming that his position in the world will ultimately protect him from their full consequences. The composure held until the civil hold was recorded. His attorney contacted mine the following morning with a prepared statement of cooperation. My father was prepared to provide investigators with a full account of the family discussions that had preceded the credentialing complaint, the preparation of the supporting declarations, and his knowledge of my brother's activities with the endowment accounts. He wished it noted that he had not been fully informed of the scope of my brother's conduct. He expressed deep regret. My brother was returned to custody that evening. There was no second release consideration. I was in my call room at the hospital when my attorney's notification came through. I had a trauma case in 3 hours. I read the message, set my phone face down on the narrow bed, and slept without difficulty for the first time in 17 days. People who learn what happened sometimes ask how I came through it without anything visibly wrong with me. They ask it gently, as though the absence of obvious damage suggests I haven't finished processing. They want to know if I miss them. They want to know if part of me held out hope. I give them the honest answer. Recovering from a family like mine, doesn't look like recovery in the way people expect. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive in a dramatic moment of release. It arrives the way daylight does in the middle of a long shift, gradually, and then all at once, and then you realize you simply have more room than you used to. There are 3 things I carry with me from all of it. The first is about the nature of conditional love. What my parents offered had contract terms, though they were never written down or stated plainly. Compliance with their preferences produced warmth. Independence produced documentation of your failures. For years I told myself that I simply hadn't done enough to satisfy the terms, that if I matched at the right hospital, or published in the right journal, or achieved the right credential, the warmth would become unconditional. What I understand now is that the condition was not performance. The condition was submission. You could not achieve your way out of the transaction, because achievement that didn't serve their narrative was not recognized as real. I stopped applying for the position. The moment I did, the leverage disappeared entirely. The second is about what the favored child in a toxic family actually has. For a long time, I believed my brother possessed something I lacked, some essential quality that made him more genuinely loved. What I've come to understand is that he possessed a role, and the role was a cage with very good lighting. He was managed, not loved. He was deployed as evidence of the family's success, which meant that the moment his conduct became a liability rather than an asset, the transaction ended without sentiment. My father redirected his gaze and signed a cooperation statement within 24 hours of the civil hold. The person designated as the winner is the one they can afford to lose the most, because the winner has been taught that their value is located outside themselves. In the approval that can be revoked the moment it becomes inconvenient, the scapegoat, it turns out, is the one who has already been forced to find their value somewhere else. I had been building mine for years, I just hadn't named it yet. The third is the one I return to most often. You do not defeat a family system built on control by confronting it loudly. You do not reach them with appeals to fairness or love or the history you share. Because those aren't the currencies they operate in. You win by being quieter than they expect you to be. You document everything. You build your record in silence while they build their version in noise. And then you step out of the way, and let them present their evidence to whoever is sitting in judgment. Because people who are absolutely certain they are untouchable will always, given the opportunity, prove the opposite. The board cleared my record in full. My fellowship continued without interruption. I finished training on schedule and accepted an attending position at a trauma center in a city where I chose every relationship I have. The River Oaks property sold at forced auction the following year. I found out through a legal notice I wasn't looking for. I felt nothing in particular. I closed the tab. I went back to my charts. My chosen family is not impressive by the standards my parents kept. It is a surgical colleague who has scrubbed in beside me on 4-hour cases, without once making me feel like I was in anyone's way. It is a neighbor who leaves food outside my door during heavy call weeks and asks nothing in return. It is a friend from residency who has responded to every 2 a.m. message for 7 years, without treating it as a favor she is owed. None of them share my blood, every one of them would stay. If you are bending yourself into shapes trying to earn the love of people who set the terms, just beyond wherever you currently are, stop and look at the pattern. It is not a coincidence that the standard keeps moving. The moving standard is the system working exactly as designed. You were never going to reach it. That was never the point. The way out of that room is not through the door they're guarding. It's through the one you've been standing next to your entire life. The one you stopped looking at because you kept believing you were almost there. You're not almost there, you're already somewhere better. You just have to turn around.